Good morning, Dr. De Souza. Good to see you.
Good morning, Daniel. Daniel, not Daniel, right?
As you wish. In Mexico, I'm Daniel. With every other person that doesn't speak Spanish, I'm Daniel. So as you wish. I really have no issue with that.
Yeah, man. And I only speak Portuguese. My Spanish so bad. My wife always jokes me about it.
You're from Brazil,
But
right? If I'm not mistaken.
from Brazil, correctly.
Oh, my man from Latin America. It's good to see more people
Yeah,
represented in the scientific
yeah,
field. Do you
yeah.
go
That's
often to
that's.
Brazil?
I go, I go every other 2 years. It depends on summer conferences, plans with the kids. So, but yeah, every other 2 years I go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What I know from Brazil, as limited as it is that people are really big into fitness, right?
Yeah, they are. I think we also have an issue with obesity, but yeah, like the bikini athletes, we have the
Jeff.
best in the world. We have yeah, bodybuilding is quite big in Brazil. We have a huge coast as well, so people live by the beach. They always more concerned about how they look like, but yeah, and you have a being a little humble, but we have a very strong research in resistance training in Brazil. I think the top lead researchers in the world in this topic, they are from Brazil. Not talk about myself, of course, but
I
yes.
But you should, because for the people that are not familiar with yourself in social media, they probably familiar with the Sousa at all. I'm sure the people have seen you, even if they don't know that they have seen you. So without further to say, I'm really grateful for your time. I've been eager to talk to you about this topic for a while now, because, well, I'm sure you recall, but a couple of years ago we had the Great Volume Wars. I think it was in the time between James Krieger and some other people with the radially and the replication studies, and all the people that went, oh, but how is it possible that we have so much volume and stuff? And then we have one of your colleagues, Alison Ennis, doing the
Oh yeah.
infamous now 52 set studies. And now the one that you just published, the 32 sets in women, particularly. So, volume, I don't know why, honestly. I'd love to hear your opinion on as to why. But volume seems to be like the big topic, like it's really divisive. So I'd love to begin on maybe with that. Why are you interested specifically in the volume side of things when it comes to research? Not only in hypertrophy, but also in strength.
Yeah, no, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Also pretty excited to be here and talking about this topic. We all are excited about it, and I think let's put it that way. Exercise dosage is an interesting topic. We always try to figure out how you can get out the most of workout doing less, or do we really need to do more to get out most of the workout and the training program we are undergoing. I think that's one thing that makes people excited about training volume literature. I keep telling that we are still scratching the surface here, because out of training volume studies, if you pay attention, we must keep all the other variables constant without any change, and you're only going to manipulate training volume. So the interaction between volume and frequency, volume and exercise selection, the volume allocation between the workouts, and recovery, individual response, which is a trick topic as well. There is a physiological phenomenon, and I don't think there's a big debate and discussion even in statistical journals. But again, how different individuals take low, moderate, high volume, the relationship between frequency and volume, volume distribution across or allocation, exercise selection. Those are things we very touch yet, right? All the training literature about volume is all the variables I mentioned here, they are held constant, and we're only going to manipulate the number of sets. So I think why so divided, because the literature is too divided, so to speak. If you, of course, you can talk a little bit about all the meta studies, and somehow they built a narrative that more volume is better.
Yeah,
And I always pointed out that in science, we do have a different perspectives, and I'm very confident to say that you never see me preaching forget about high volume. All you need is low volume. Low volume is the best. You never see me preaching that. I'm still trying to understand. Are we studying this topic right? Why the studies are so different? Of course, training status. I think the population variance, right? Like a different training status between studies. We can also expand on that a little bit. The sampling variance, right? Like how each study, the sample size and representativeness of sample size, how those factors also impact the difference between studies. Methodological approaches, sometimes do not talk about the same muscles, the same type of measurement, and measurement error. That's something that people in this field quite often disregard. I'm still not skeptical. I think if there is a dose response, I think that diminution returns might take place way earlier or fewer sets than a lot of people are recommending at this point. But it's so many factors that come into play that explain the differences between studies. I think, for example, we can start talk about whether or not someone should increase their volume and then talk about the studies that were designed for that. But there are so many differences, methodological differences, measurement error, population variance, sampling variance, all those things might explain the differences between studies. The so many unknowns that I mentioned, we're not studying yet. And I get the confusion, and sometimes for general individuals who just want to understand how to do their workout, is quite difficult to navigate. I get all the confusion and the division in this topic, because you can't come up with any narrative. I can't, if I do the cherry pick, I can talk about low volume, I can talk about moderate or high. Bottom line, I think you can grow substantial muscle from low to high volume. And it always goes back to the one principles of evidence-based practice is your preference as a trainee, whether or not that fits your lifestyle, your training goals. But I think that's a reason it's so divided, because the studies, they don't align so well, and probably because the things I told you that might explain the differences.
totally. And that actually leads to one of the two, well, at least for me, important methodological questions that we need to be aware of, at least, if not capable of answering, at least be aware of them. And one is that not all studies account for volume in the same way. Some studies count, let's say, a row for the biceps, let's say squats for the glutes, as in Josh's words from Data Driven Strength, the recent meta regressions, you have the total, direct, and fractional sets. And I think that's one of the first limitations of interpreting any volume study. How are the researchers accounting for this volume? And the second one is, how are they measuring muscle growth? In what time frame? Is it 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, whatever? Is this standardized? Because this is something particularly interesting that I found in the conversation with Sam Buckner. I think you were on that one
Uh-huh.
in the audience, which was really, really cool. How people actually measure muscle growth. Is it the researchers themselves doing the ultrasound? Is it the students of the researchers doing the ultrasound? Is this all standardized? You know, all these topics that for us, when we read studies or or at least the abstracts, flew right by our heads. So I'd like to ask you, in your research, how do you confront with these questions? How to actually account for volume in a more simple yet direct way? And also, what are the challenges that you guys in the research in the lab face when trying to measure muscle growth?
Yeah, no, that's great. Twofold question. That is a very good one. I'm going to start with the the fractional part, and it is important. I think that's a really important uh, issue that we need to discuss. And I keep saying that a meta-analysis in any field does not provide any definitive answer. Even and again, I think it's the second, because I was in the podcast last week, and it was the first time I talk about Josh study, Palland et al., and Josh Palland and all the colleagues, and big shout out to Josh, because I saw him containing the damage of a misinformation and people communicating the findings of the study in the way that was not so precise. And sometimes when we share perspectives as scientists, people use our perspectives to attack other people.
Yeah.
And we stay, and that was not the goal. It's just to expand the discussion, try to point it out, all the nuances and things you got to consider. So when it comes to the meta regression, it's important to say that the best model fit relied on exploratory approach, which was counting the fractional sets. And that's, I think that's per se is something we, it's pretty cool, because it brings up something we need to discuss. I think if you ask any researcher, should we count indirect sets as a fractional? For example, if you're doing bench press, should we count that as some triceps work? If you're doing lateral pull down, does that count for elbow flexor? The answer across the board is going to be yes, we should.
Yeah.
However, how we should count it? Should we count as half? What is the criteria for counting half sets? Because indirect sets provide the half of stimulus, it provides the half of the outcome. Is how that, so that's just something that per se the best model fit in their meta regression relied on something exploratory, which they stated in the paper. They mentioned that. They were very clear that that's not so objective. And again, we can say that when you consider, we don't know where it's going, but we might be dealing with some systematic bias, because should our indirect sets be counted as zero 0.5 or maybe 0.7 or 0.4? So I think that's something what I liked, and I hope we expand on that discussion. We need more data. Bottom line is we need more data to understand the impact of indirect sets on hypertrophy, and maybe figure out a way to how we should account. For example, hypertrophy studies in lats muscle or back muscles, we don't have it. So how are you gonna? So is so many things we need to advance. But again, I think we all agree. Yes, we should account indirect sets. However, how and the criterion is not that clear. And again, Josh and all the crew, they stated the best model fit relied on something exploratory. For example, we don't have too many studies above 25 sets. When we use the fractional, if you pay attention to the number of dots above 25 sets in their graph, you see a lot of estimate points. That means, oh, now with a fractional, we have more data above 25, which increases the power of the analysis, so on and so forth. So again, I think they were very transparent and honest with that approach, but again, it depends. It depends who is conveying the information. It is something interesting. It is an interesting approach, but it is a limitation, in my opinion, because we still trying to figure out how to approach indirect sets. The challenges of measuring muscle hypertrophy. That's great question, and I have been involved in so many different types of measuring hypertrophy, from MRI in my early grad studies with the master. My master, I worked for concurrent, and I used MRI. Then in my doctorate about programming and periodization, I also use MRI. Here in my lab, I have been using ultrasound, primarily with a thickness, and I can explain why I do that. But I also use the DEXA, the regional fat-free mass accretion, so I can draw an area of interest for someone type. And then for that part, I can ask the device, the DEXA, tell me the fat-free mass accretion, the changing in fat, so on and so forth. So usually I'm combining the last two studies from my lab. Not the last two, even the rep tempo, most of studies now are combining local hypertrophy measurement with ultrasound and fat-free mass accretion for the area of interest. So, before I talk about the challenge, I agree with Dr. Buckner, and another big shout out to him, because it is another one fighting the fight for better communication in the space. Again, I never seen him preaching low volume is the best thing and low and high volume is something useless. We just trying to do our jobs as a scientist, and educate people how to receive information, be more critical, more skeptical, and understand the differences between studies. But for example, the studies with Allison, and Allison was in mind for the holidays. He came from New York to my house, so we spent some good time together. Was good. We started two new papers. It's an old data I had about the infamous swelling. So we
Yeah.
are work on that. Yeah, it's acute data, but we can talk about that in the different live or something like that. So the studies I have done with Allison, we have been measuring primary VL cross-sectional area and VL thickness. So, and that means the lateral part of the thigh. So, and with Allison, we have been using what is a technique. We validated the technique against MRI. Was a bunch of crazy Brazilians. We had access to MRI, and we take multiple shots of the VL along the muscle across the thigh, and then we built the whole image of the VL, and then you analyze the VL cross-sectional area. We were the Brazilians who validated the technique against MRI. So that technique was validated against MRI. And Allison studies, we have been using that technique plus the lateral muscle thickness. So Scarpelli, Maíra Scarpelli, she did a famous study with the 20% increase. Was the paper that everybody started to use as a reference to increase 20%. And her mentor, Clayton Libarge, we were in that study in which we validated the technique, let's say reconstruction of VL cross-sectional area, and we validated against MRI. So, and it's pretty close. So Allison papers, we have been using that technique. Measurement error is a little higher compared to thickness, because thickness is so straightforward. You just draw a line, a straight line in the muscle you want to measure, and you only measure one dimension of the muscle size. Whereas when you're measuring VL, you're measuring pretty much the two dimensions, the height, the thickness, and the width. So we measure those two. So again, that technique is a great technique because we validate it against MRI, but it has a little bit more measurement error compared to thickness that is pretty more straightforward. So in my studies, especially, and that's what was my call, was like, you know what? We are looking another thing that people usually don't talk about it. We are looking at such small differences that sometimes those differences might be compatible with a measurement error. And that's something that I was pointed out about the meta regression as well. I decided in my lab, as we are measuring people in which the differences and the effect is so small, I need to have the minimal error as possible. So when I got here at UT, I started to validate like a muscle cross-sectional area, muscle thickness. My ultrasound also does panoramic view. You kind of run with the probe on someone's muscle, and you can kind of make a film, and you can analyze the whole area. And after working with a measurement error with students in the lab, like, you know what? We are so good when you do ultrasound only thickness. My measurement error is about 1% coefficient variation. That's about 2% percentage error, which is pretty good. For things to measure muscle accretion in people that usually thickness does not change more than 7-8% sometimes. So it's really important to have a solid measurement. So that's why I decided to use thickness, because measurement error is the minimal and I'm dealing with such small differences. The challenge about when to measure, because usually we do studies with students population, and we kind of need to follow the semester, right? The semester is scheduled. And that's why most of studies in our field, I think two inherent limitation, inherent limitations in exercise science, studies are very short in duration. So you only provide a small snapshot of someone's training life, because you talk about 8 to 12, and studies usually also are underpowered. So those are two limitations. Again, regarding the first one, I think because we primarily use the students while they are here at university. Of course, I think if we measure something with a 6, 8 weeks, 12, 16, 20,
Yeah,
24,
yeah.
the effects start to get smaller and smaller. That's another thing I keep telling that, although I keep telling that the difference you are looking at are the small differences. And they are already inflated by such a high specialized training period. When people join the lab, they train in the way they do not train by themselves. So again, and now goes back, Daniel, to the researcher and their scientific choices. So we all deal with different scientific choices. As long as you have a good reasoning and good justification for our choices, I think I'm fine with that. But yes, it's not that easy to run studies, ensure your measurement error is small, especially when you're study training people. For example, the last study we did with the menstrual cycle, I was collaborating with a Dr. Libarge. We calculated the minimal detectable difference for that study and was 7.5%. So again, to consider something practical or like a meaningful, significant, they should increase at least 7.5% because the measurement error involved in that study. But yeah, all those challenging choices we gotta do and be as transparent as possible. Again, I think some labs do a better job than others. It's something we're still developing as a science field. Exercise science is a new science field. Not all studies report measurement error in their studies. A common practice, I'm not a big fan at all, is, measurement error was determined elsewhere. But I don't know if elsewhere, if you do the same way, if you do the same way than elsewhere, every study I started in my lab, and even the study I'm doing right now, the sleeping study, before the students started, I sit with them, they practice the measurement, they plot the data, we calculate measurement errors, sometimes like, guys, not ready yet. Let's practice more. What's going on? Okay, let me see what you're doing. So every study, we determine measurement error before the study. And for the sleeping study, we did that for the first leg last semester. We are just doing again. The students are using 5-6 people in the lab and measuring thickness and plotting the data and calculate measurement error. So again, that's another thing that we gotta talk more about in exercise science, how we measure things and the measurement error rates across labs. Yeah, that's something that definitely is important and impacts the outcomes and how we're gonna make interpretations from the different studies.
It's super interesting because, well, several things came to mind. The first one is that, yeah, most studies are actually in the quadriceps muscles, perhaps in the biceps, in the triceps. But why is that? Perhaps, correct me, you are the one that knows this sort of thing. I honestly have no clue. Maybe it's harder to measure the back muscles, right? Because there are ton of muscles and perhaps other muscles, let's say the glutes are kind of invasive and you face practical issues that we really do not have a clue of when we read papers. And the other thing that came to mind is the choices that you researchers take that impact the outcomes and perhaps the way that we interpret the results. One particular study came to mind, the previous meta-analysis we have by Bas and Eco Bas from Spain, the meta about volume and stuff. Well, when you actually read the paper, you'll find out for the people listening, not for yourself, that it was only in three muscles. It was the quadriceps, it was the biceps and the triceps, the 12 to 20 sets. But what happens with the pecs? What happens with the hamstrings? You know, all these limitations, and what happens beyond 20 sets? Is it what some people are going to as young volume, or what are the limitations? You know, a lot of things that we just flew right through our minds. We don't take into account, and I think the most I wouldn't say dangerous, but perhaps difficult thing to deal with this kind of information is in social media, with people that take these sort of findings like you have to train this way. If you don't train this way, you're not evidence based, or you know whatever. And these things, I don't know how you face it, but you're in both. You're in social media and also in the research. Some people may have more more of a big voice in social media than in research. Other people in the research are not even aware that social media exists. I think of Michael Roberts, for instance, Michael D. Roberts. He's not really on social media because he has a ton of publications. So anyway, the point I'm trying to bring is for you, all these limitations, once you go beyond these limitations, what comes next? Because I have two particular studies from your team that I would love to hear you talk about. One
Yeah.
is the one where you took the baseline volume, and then for the people involved did either the baseline volume, I think it was for one leg, and more volume for the other. And the most recent that you just published a couple days ago, the NS, the shout out to NS for steering the pot in the fitness community, where you actually saw more muscle growth. Why do you think are the discrepancies? What can we make of this of all this craziness?
Okay, that's a great question, but I just want to go back to what you said. Why we do primary studies on legs,
Yeah.
especially with males, they are willing to. Usually, it's quite hard for someone to train legs hard twice a week, and usually they see opportunity. You know what? I'm gonna train twice a week my legs in the lab. I get my free
Right.
protein, and great. I'm finally gonna push my legs hard. So it's easier to control like a confounding factors because sometimes and happened that in the past we had a full body. We had a study the auto regulation exercise selection we published a while ago, and we found one guy working out in the university gym facility, and like what you're doing. Oh, do you know what? I think that's not too much training for me. And again, the guy was training 3 times per week in the lab, and we found him. So usually, because once they join the study, what we tell them, hey, keep your training routine for all the rest, do not change it. But for the lower body, only is going to be trained here. So that's one thing. Like we have a better control, better adherence. People are more willing to come to the lab and train the legs only. And another point you touched, Daniel, and you absolutely correct. Measuring arms is way harder than legs, in my opinion. It's way harder because the curve shape, the depth of the muscle, like triceps, such difficult measurement to do, and usually like lower body thickness is more consistent, at least my experience. That's why we did pack when you did the intersect stretching study. Pack is hard to measure because when they put the probe on someone's leg, when they put the probe on someone's leg, the muscle stays still; it does not move. But if I put on the pack, the person is breathing. So I gotta find the best moment to measure and not compromise the quality of my measurement, because ultrasound is slight tilt, slight pressure, slight change in position, change completely. So that's why I think it's something we feel more confident measuring a lower body and doing lower body studies. Potentially less confounding variables because people will come to the lab, train twice a week, and this is it. And also the quality of the measurement. The other question was about it. Sorry, was the studies
Yeah.
we did, the methodological.
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
so that's something. And again, like if you think about, yeah, and then you have the two Allison. Okay, so it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
consider the previous volume and the two last studies. That a lot of cool things to talk about it. So when I started looking at the volume literature, especially in training people, something that always I'm concerned is about the quality of the research design. And in my opinion, was like, I don't think we're doing that right, because when people come to the lab and they are randomly assigned to different groups, people who are usually assigned to the higher volume groups, they're going to increase compared to what they were doing previously, the study, and people assigned to lower volume studies, lower volume conditions, they're probably going to reduce what they are doing before the study. And again, I think was the study from Brigato, which they had 16, 24, and 32 sets. The 24 and 32 sets had a better results, but they increased on average 75% and almost 100% than their previous volume. Whereas the 16 weekly sets, they dropped the volume by 25% compared to the previous. And I was like, is that explaining the results? Like, is that why we are seeing the people with a more volume doing better in some studies than others? So then I designed the first study like, hey, let's randomize people. I knew it in that study, the one problem would happen, that was some people would still reduce their previous training volume. Because what we did in the first study from Albay, okay, we had like one of the strongest populations in training volume studies. The 1 rep max body mass ratio was 2.05. So what we did was, let's randomize them based on what they're doing before. So regardless the group, everybody going to start with the same previous volume. So on average, the groups were doing 12 weekly sets. So the 12 group kind of did not change on average. The 18 group increased as the 24 weekly sets also increased. After that study, I knew it, like that was always was playing, like, okay, we do one study, we randomize based on what they're doing previously. After that, we're gonna do a study in which no one is gonna decrease their volume. So that was the last study. That was last study we published. And again, interesting, that study was completely ignored on social media. I don't know why. Along with Sam Buckner's study. So
Yeah.
Buckner's study also looking at previous training volume with a biceps, which we can expand on that study too. Those two studies showing no effects of increasing volume were completely ignored on social media, and it caught my attention. And like, are we communicating science or doing something else here? Because that's not communicating science, in my opinion. And so when we did the last study, we had like everybody, one group kept their previous training volume, other group increased by 30, and then you have a third group increasing by 60.
Yeah.
On average, before the study, they were doing around 14 weekly sets. Was the control group on average 12, 14. The 30% increase was about 19 sets, and the 60% increase on average was about 25. But you have a people doing 40 sets in each group. So that's another thing. Like when I see people doing a lot of volume and people talk about edema, I don't see people doing 40 sets always growing more compared to people doing fewer sets. But again, with that study, it's something I keep pointing out is that, you know what, we still need to advance methodology here. So from methodological standpoint, I think, like I said, what we are observing in the labs is kind of an inflated outcome because the high specialization training type. And that's why, although someone did not change the training, the dosage of their previous training, but there was an increase in the level of effort, which we know that matters a lot for hypertrophy. So moving forward, of course, I want to improve methodological approaches. And one thing I really want to do is kind of have a acclimatization period in which people you train in the lab, everybody going to train 6 weeks hard the way they train in the lab. After that period, we're going to randomize them between the groups and see what's going to happen. It's challenging because the things already said, but again, just going back to the increasing, and then I'm going to talk about the last studies from Alison Ennis. So at this point, I have 3 studies that were designed for considering previous training volume. We had the Scarpelli, Maida Scarpelli, was an intra-subject design, and they use ultrasound, the technique we developed and validated. So the technique that we built, the muscle, that was the technique used. We had the Buckner study for biceps, and you have a my study for lower body. So Scarpelli found an effect, and Buckner did not. Although we can say that the Buckner study, the volume was on average for increasing the volume was 10 weekly sets, which is not that high, versus 6 weekly sets. However, the absolute change from Buckner matched with a study from Hosgrave. They have a 20, I think they had a 27, 18, and 9 weekly sets. So again, that's one thing that's important to say. Like a Buckner study, the absolute change kind of matches with studies that use higher training volumes for biceps. Hosgrave is one example, and Buckner only used direct sets, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he did. So, and we have my study from the lab. So we have 2 studies that did not show any benefit about increasing the volume compared to one study that did. So when you look at Addison, and very interesting, because I asked Maida yesterday, can you send me your pre and post data? Because the individualized group on average was doing 24 weekly sets, and they used the same technique we used in the infamous 52 weekly sets. So the average change, or the average absolute change for Scarpelli study and Allison 52, using the same training, using the same measurement technique, the same muscle, the same measurement technique that we validated, is almost the same. It's 5 point something centimeters squared. If you look now, it's the same. Like if you look at the 2 studies from Allison, the new one, now we can compare, because same, let's think about that. Same lab, same personnel, same people involved, same measurement device and technique. So when you look at, and for 52 weekly sets, we did not find differences between the groups. We were clear, we stated that in the paper. Yeah, it might indicate a slight advantage, but uncertainty data, significance, nothing confirmed it. So we pointed out. Now when you look at two studies from Allison that we use the same location, same device, same technique, the absolute change, again, is almost identical. So it's telling us that above certain point, it goes back to the diminishing returns that Pallant was stating, that as you add in more and more sets, you get less in return. And it goes back to another thing we got to do better as when you're communicating science. People are using interchangeably significant differences with meaningful differences.
Yeah.
I think that's the point. And again, the reason percentage was way different. The percentage was different because the baseline, the change was exactly the same, but for the males studies, if I'm not mistaken, the baseline cross-sectional area was around 40 centimeters square. For the females, was about 20 something. That was the percentage was huge difference when you compare, but the absolute change was exactly the same between the two studies. So it shows us, to me, that above a certain point, I don't see, if there is change, there are very small change, and they might be comparable with a measurement error. So that's the type of exercise. I know it's hard to do, but and to compare all the studies together, we need a formal approach, aka meta studies. But like I said, the researchers' choices on meta studies also impact the outcomes. So I don't know if I don't want to make that too sciencey, but I hope you got my point.
That's exactly the point, that we cannot summarize all these findings, all these caveats, all these limitations in, let's say, a TikTok of 10 to 15 seconds because people get distracted. Well, we need you to be focused, because it's really complex. But paradoxically, when we are training, it doesn't need to be that complex, at least in my most humble opinion. And I think a couple things came to mind that I think are worth mentioning. One, somebody in the comments mentioned about nutritional intake, which you guys actually accounted for in the most recent N study. You had people track their intake, you had a registered dietitian, you actually take that into account and you actually control for that. And the second one is, it's funny, it's curious, because in the very same paper, both the latest NS and the Josh meta regressions, the language that you guys use, it's really cautious, especially in the conclusions, in the limitations, and even in spite of that cautiousness, people just jump to conclusions. Oh, okay, so more volume, the better. I'm gonna do 52 sets. But perhaps there are another caveats that I'd love to hear your opinion on, that may impact on the outcomes. One, for instance, is that in the latest N study, you have this 4-week period of familiarization that people train just to have a similar baseline from then on. And on the other one, is that we're comparing two different approaches. Let me see, the main researcher
Mm-hmm.
is, I have it right here, Andrew Barsham. In that one, you compared fixed volume, let's say baseline, 30% increase, 60% increase. It's a categorical comparison, right? And in the new one, it's a continuous comparison. You add sets slowly, slowly. I think it's not the same, and perhaps it could impact the outcomes, right? And also, if time serves, I would love to hear your take on edema, because that's a big, a big topic online, man, and makes people go crazy. So first
Yeah.
off, that you guys actually take a lot of co-founders into account. And do you think the outcomes could be different when we compare volume increases or different fixed volumes as a categorical and as a continuous variable?
Yeah, that's probably something that great questions. Again, it goes back to researchers' choices. I think I don't see analyzing volume as a categorical variable a problem depending on the research question. Because when we did the 0, 30, and 60, those are the categories I was interested to. I could not extrapolate beyond that because my design was for those categories. When you have a more data, and the spoiler alert, we are working now on the retrospective data because we have all the information for previous training volume. All the studies we published, I think we had 170 people. We might analyze in the more continuous manner. So again, I don't think that's a problem. I think it always goes back to the main research question and design, and whether or not it should be analyzed as category or continuous. That's my opinion. I think it all goes back to the research design. I think going back to something said way before that was that social media goes crazy, and I was using the same analogy. One study, if it's well done, is one more tool in a box. And then when you open your toolbox, you can see all the possibilities based on the tools you have in your box. So one study, when it's well done, does not prove someone is right or wrong, does not exclude the previous data, is one more piece of the puzzle, or from a practitioner standpoint, is one more tool in a box. So it opens one more possibility. As new data keeps coming out, you're gonna put more and more tools in your box if the researchers and the studies, were well done. You have more tools in your box. For the moment you don't have a space to put a new tool, you don't throw away the older tool, you buy a new one. So now every time you have a new study, you have a new possibilities. It's a new possibility to apply something if it's well done. And now it goes back to the principle of evidence-based practice. What about the preference of my client, trainee, my personal goals, my lifestyle? I'm totally fine if you want to do moderate to high volume. And again, maybe that's only doable in specialization phase for a few muscle groups. You don't have a time, right? Most people don't have a time to do 25 sets per muscle group per week. It's quite hard, unless that's part of your job. You're a physique athlete, you spend a lot of time. But again, people need to stop on social media that every time one study, and I get it, because the way they use the studies is to prove I'm right and someone is wrong, right? It's always about that. But again, a new study is well, if it's well done, is a new tool in the box. Now when you open your toolbox, you see all the possibilities you have. With a new study, again, it does not prove someone is wrong or exclude previous study. With the volume discussion, we are making exercise training program and exercise. We are making that exclusive and not inclusive, because people assume, oh, to be evidence based, I need to do 52 weekly sets. No, that's not the only option. There are other options on the table. You can't, and again, the unknowns. Science is not telling you to do 52 weekly sets, 12, 14. Science is giving you the basis. And from there, you can adapt based on the things we talk about it. Think about always your toolbox and possibilities you have for different clients. You're going to use different tools for different clients and trainees and so on and so forth. The edema is something that it concerns me, the level of discussion at this point. It is very intriguing. So I keep telling that because now I heard they changed it because was damaged. And now I think they realized that damage is very unlikely in those scenarios. Now people are talking about extracellular water, they're always trying to find a way to kind of diminishing the evidence or the finding rather than understanding why things are different. Like the conversation we had, why the studies are different. I hope people understand better now why the studies are different. So I always talk about that. Okay, what kind of edema you talk about it? Water the transitory effect of a water, fluid, or blood flow accumulation. Is that the edema talk about it? Everybody who lifts knows that, yes, I finish my workout, I'm posing in the front of the mirror, I look big, jacket. You have a shower, it goes away. That's not the edema talk about it, right? That goes away so quickly. The secondary option for edema would be muscle damage. Muscle damage, so that case would be muscle damage causing edema, inflating the measurements of muscle hypertrophy. And again, that does not have any support from literature, because I think there is a classic study, like the seminal work from Priscilla Clarkson, and I forgot the first name, but I think it's Keiju Nozaka. Those are the first so many seminal work about training volume, and they did exercise inducing damage within 9 days, and they found that even repeating the exercise induced damage does not aggravate the edema. So again, edema goes away in 48 hours, 72 hours easily. We do like the muscle damage, right? And again, people are getting acute studies, studies that look at the exercise-inducing edema session and extrapolating for trained individuals doing the same exercise progression for 12 weeks. And I keep telling that another paper from Damas became quite famous with the studies about muscle damage and everything else he did. So they did kind of a cluster analysis, and they found that the best discriminator for damage was muscle strength, not CK. A lot of people love CK. See, every time I work with a CK, it varies big time. You got to do a log transformation to analyze the data. It's so complicated. So CK is a poor metric for damage. It goes all over the place. So again, what we haven't seen in those studies is people are getting stronger. And going back to Allison, the latest study and the 52 weekly sets. So we don't have any data that after people doing the same training sessions for 12 weeks, think about the last increase in training volume was 17 days before the measurement. So that increase was about 11% increase in training volume. That we don't have any data that suggests that would increase edema and that would inflate the measurement. So again, I do not dispute completely, but if you're gonna apply deductive reasoning is more unlikely, in my opinion, than likely. That if you're gonna apply again deductive reasoning, consider the data we know at this point is more unlikely than likely. That's my opinion. And last thing about edema, if there was always a systematic bias inflating measurements, every study from my lab with a 24 sets, every study with a higher volume would show that, yes, high volume consistently show higher volumes consistently show more hypertrophy. And like I said, when you look at the data from my lab, all those guys in the last study doing 40, 45, 48, we had one guy doing 48 sets. He wasn't the guy who grew more. So again, that's my point. It's a lazy discussion, in my opinion. It's a biased discussion that people refuse to understand the differences and why studies present such landscape that seems controversial sometimes. But again, we need to learn how to navigate those differences.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to people just wanting to be right because of their followers, because of them being seen as authorities or whatever. Because when you again read the study and you find out that all the measurements were taken at least 72 hours after the last training session, well, that lets you know that the researchers are aware of this possibility with all these limitations and are actually taking into account for their methodology. But again, people just seem to ignore all those bits. And one thing that you posted a couple days ago with the study on social media on Instagram was the disclaimer, which I don't know if it was meant as just being humorous, but I think on a serious note, it's a necessity. I think it could be really helpful to actually have a disclaimer that one study, like you mentioned, is just a piece of the puzzle. It's not meant to make you right. It's not meant to make other people wrong, and to completely change how you intervene, how you do your training, your clients, or whatever. And some studies perhaps have more limitations than others. And like with everything, as time goes by, I'm sure we'll get access to more technologies to new ways, new paradigm shifts about how we understand and study these things. That, like for example, the research that Martin Ruffalo has been carrying out on proximity to failure and all the way he approaches research in that area. I think it sets the, how do you say it? Well, sets the standard for the research to come, right? And I think in volume at least, well, you can tell me about that. We're not right there, right?
I think again, I think you're getting better if you compare the one of the most famous studies when it comes to training volume. The investigator wasn't blinded for the
Uh,
measurements, and again, I'm close to that investigator. We published together, but if that was any other topic, can you imagine like someone doing study about lengthening partials, and the person who did was not blinded? Man, that would be like that would be crazy. I think like showing the previous training volume, approaching for more transparency, showing the measurement arrow. I think we are getting better as a field. I think there's so many good and young talents. I must say that the when it comes to proximity to failure and repetitions in reserve and how that impacts, we have a long way to go. I think VOIM is a little ahead because I have more data specific for that. We know where to go now. Of course, Martin Raffle is doing a solid job. Josh Balland, Allison. I feel bad because there's so many young talents. I was telling to the other podcast, I see those younger guys, and man, at their age, they're way smarter than when I wasn't. Not smart at all, but they're like, hey, they're doing solid work. I think again we are getting better, but we need to avoid double standards when dealing with information, regardless the paper that was published or who published. We got to stop for double standard, be more critical with one paper when the findings prove me I'm right, and undermine limitations of other paper when also I can use that to prove my point. It's not about, again, social media does not affect at all what I do as a scientist. I don't care about followers at all. It's not being like not being arrogant, but as a scientist, I'm here to share my perspective, and hopefully I can educate some people how to navigate those things. But social media should not affect how we do science. It's always about the rigor and the quality of what we are doing. And again, I think we are getting better. If you look at previous studies about training volume and what was reported, go to the method session. I I'm the one putting pictures from measurements since I don't know how many years ago. So we
yeah.
don't, so many studies, we don't have a picture, images from the measurement. We don't have a measurement arrow, or they're going to say the measurement arrow was described elsewhere. So those are the things I think we are getting better. And going back to edema, the last thing to talk about it, that something came in my mouth, in my mind right now is I do have a data. It's acute data, the data as any data, and I hope that from that data we start to advance the discussion, because the data I had from my lab, we had people came to the lab 3 times. They had 7 sets per session across squat, leg press, knee extension. They have a 14 sets, and they had a 21 sets. So they started for 90% of their 10 RM max, and we found that regardless the like it was interesting recovery, exertion, strength were a little different, but when you look at measurement like a thickness echo intensity increase right after, because we measure before the session, right after 24, 72, and 48 hours. 24 hours, and you do have a data that aligns for that. 24 hours, he went back to the baseline, even with a 21 sets. And you talk about training people, average 10 RM for the squat, 130 kilos. Average 10 RM for leg press, 300 kilos. And average 10 RM for knee extension, 70 something kilos. So again, all the study we did with repeating training bouts, like a training techniques, they did a 10 reps to failure for pec. Then 48 hours later, they repeated 10 sets to failure. So within 48 hours, 20 sets to failure. He went back 2 hours. 2 hours later, he went back to the baseline. So again, training people is not exposed to damage as a lot of people are talking about it. It is again, just I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about the data, but I do have a data that does not support. Again, it's acute, but if it did not show any response in acute fashion, there is no reason for, by repeating the intervention, would see edema down the line. But anyway, just want to share
Yeah,
those findings.
are those gonna be published soon, or is it just data that you
Yeah,
have
that's
collected?
a paper Alison and I we are working. I we presented part of the data in the conference in 2017,
Yeah.
and I only present I think was 24 hours later. So I do have all the data, but I lost the training log. So I'm trying to figure out a way to show effort level across the conditions. If you can do something like if you can modeling something to estimate, because I lost the training logs because the study was conducted. The only thing I had was like a training volume, all the metrics I need for the study, but the actual training
Yeah.
logs I could find them. So the plan is to submit by summer.
Hopefully,
Should be
and the
out
way
should be out later this year probably.
I'll be on the lookout, and the way things are going in social media, it has one of two ways. Either gets ignored for some weird reason that I cannot comprehend, or gets blown up and people start using that research for some other point to prove a point. I don't know, man. But
Yeah.
just on a final note, because I want to be super respectful of your time. Yes, actually, I think it's getting better, and the more years I'm involved as an educator, as trying to communicate science the best I can with my own limitations, because I haven't conducted research. But just as a curiosity of mine, I find it fascinating, and also I find it awe-inspiring, and also I'm just delighted to get to talk to people like you in the research, actually doing the work and not being blown out by social media and trying to gain followers and all these things that I know can really blur the results and the way we communicate and the way we understand science and the whole point of science. So just as a big thanks to you, Dr. De Souza. I think that covers it up. I'll be uploading this video as is to YouTube so people can watch it in a more friendly device other than their cell phones. So anyway, I don't know if you want to add something else or
No, thank you so much for having me and opening the space to I could share my thoughts. Appreciate that. Yes, someone mentioned here the repeated bout effect is the protective
yeah.
adaptation against new occurrence of muscle damage. I forgot to mention that too. There's always so many things coming to my mind. But thanks so much, Danielle. Was a had a such good time. And yes, I think just be open for differences and keep in mind that every new study is a new possibility. It does not exclude previous data, does not prove someone right or wrong. be open for differences. That's how we learn, right? Thank you.
No, thanks to you. Don't even mention it. And also, I'll be sure to actually put the disclaimer on the YouTube video and here on Instagram so people can hopefully read it and better communicate science. So, anyway, I hope you have a great rest of the day. I really wish we can do a second part because there are a lot of things that came to mind, and our minds go crazy with the training stuff. So, anytime you're more than welcome. Thanks for taking the time, Dr. De Souza.
Thank you. Let's do it. All right. Take care.
See you later.